And welcome back, students. We are going to now start Adobe Exercise 2 for Illustrator. And to get started this time, we're going to need to get this water background.png, which is on my lesson plans. If you haven't done that, you can just go ahead and right-click, hit Save Image As if it does not automatically download. And then when you do that, you can just direct it here to your Downloads folder. Once you've done that, though, of course, what you want to do is go to Adobe Illustrator and make a new file like we've been doing. So I'm going to go to New. I'm going to go to Web again. I'm going to make it common. And I want to go ahead and do File Place. Now, File Place is how we get those images in there. Now, with this image, you can tell that this image, for example, is larger than that of my document. So I can actually come in here, and using the selection tool, hold down that Shift key to kind of resize this image if I want. All right, now I want this to fill up exactly what's on my canvas. So again, holding down the Shift key, I'm going to drag that to try and fill up as much of that canvas as it possibly can. And you can see that it has fit nicely within that dimensions. All right, clicking off of it, we now have this in here. Now, if I come in here and try to work with this, this background may end up accidentally getting dragged around. So in order to prevent that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to my Layers panel. I'm going to click a Create New Layer. And I'm going to lock that background here. And this layer 1 right here, I'm actually going to double click on that. And I'm going to rename that to background, just so I know that that is what the significance of this is for. All right. Now let's go ahead and add some stuff into here. So in order for me to add different things in here, we're going to do some shape tools. And so we're going to make a fish, we're going to have some bubbles, and we're going to put some text on here. So let's get started with drawing our fish. We're going to use our curvature tool here. And it doesn't have to be a perfectly beautiful fish that we're making in here. But we do want to make sure that we are on the correct layer here, because if you notice, when it's on background, it gave me the cannot draw with this. So I'll go to layer 2, and now you can see I can draw. It doesn't have to be a beautiful fish, but I'm just going to go ahead and make my best attempt at a fish. Right. So there's my quick attempt at a fish. And I want to go ahead and, let's say, fill that fish in with a different color. So right now that fish is kind of black, so let's just go ahead and change that fill color on that fish. I'm going to change it to orange because I want a nice kind of goldfish looking thing. So there's my little fish, happy. And I can stretch and shrink that however I want to try and make it look the dimensions that I want it to be. Again, this wasn't the perfect dimensions of this fish, but it allowed me to easily come in here and manipulate these different pathing points. I'm just stretching these anchors out right now just so that I can get this maybe to look a little bit better in terms of some dimensions. All right, and what I want to do is maybe I want to add some more shapes onto this fish. So maybe I want to give it some eyes, so I'm going to use the ellipse tool. So I'm going to draw it an eye. And I want to make it so instead of it being orange, I want maybe to be, let's give it a nice black there for the eye. And then I also want to maybe give it a smile, so I'm going to go here to the line tool, but I actually want to do an arc. So I'm just going to draw underneath of it. And it's very hard to see with the arc tool here of what exactly I made. So what we can do is I can go ahead and zoom in on that. And I'm just going to try and set each of these shapes to the best of their abilities. And just shrink that in. All right, so there's my fish. He's kind of happy, I think. Not really quite sure. I don't understand the language of fish. I'm not Aquaman. So here's our fish. And let's go ahead next and get ready to very quickly draw some bubbles for him. So bubbles obviously are going to be using the ellipse tool, and we can just go ahead and draw those bubbles as is. And what we can do here is I'm going to actually use a kind of a gradient effect upon them. All right, but I want to edit that gradient, and we're just going to go over that again using the gradient tool here of how I want those bubbles to appear. Now I want them to actually be not left to right like this. I maybe want them to be more of this kind of summer effect. So the inside is light and the outsides are more dark. So I'm fine with it being kind of this white in the middle, but I really kind of want that to be more of a blue. So let's just go over gradients again. So I'm going to go to here. I'm going to pick more of a blue color, maybe not that dark. Something a little more of a lighter spectrum. So there's a good bubble color right there. And then what I can do is I can actually go ahead and hold on Alt here, and I can actually make new bubbles as I go along. Just kind of pasting those in. So here's his bubbles. And I can use then this selection tool to move those bubbles to where I want them to be. So they're coming off of his mouth. Now the thing is, these bubbles are not all the proper size, so I can hold down the Shift key so I can resize these bubbles as needed. So that way they start off kind of on the small side, and they gradually get larger as they ascend towards the surface. All right. So there's my fish with a couple bubbles on him. And next, let's go ahead and get ready to add some text in here. So I'm going to just grab my text tool. I'm going to draw across. Of course, I'm going to fill in just some sample text in there. I'm not sure if that's some extra sample text down there or if that's some residual thing. So I'm just going to delete that and draw just again. And let's go ahead and just put the word bubbles. All right. Now, of course, it's very small here, so let's go ahead and jump that up to about 120. All right, so there's the word bubbles. And what I want to do with this word bubbles is I want to make it so this word is going to have some nice stylizing to it. All right, so let's try Goaty Stout here. If you don't have that available, remember you can pick a similar font. So I'm going to try to take this text box here and resize it so that this fits. All right, so there's bubbles as you can see it there. And let's just position that. So there's the word bubbles. Now the thing about bubbles as it stands right now is that this doesn't have very much going on for other than it's just a normal amount of text. Right. We can go ahead and do things like stylizing it. So we of course can change the fill of the text. So I can make that text, for example, to have an orange fill. Right, and that would give it a little bit close to maybe how this fish is. But if I want to change the stroke, I can do that as well. And when I apply a stroke color, you can see that it adds a kind of border around it. When it has just this white with the line through it, that means there's none. And right now that stroke is set to 1 point. Now what I want to do is increase the stroke weight so that way that text is a little bit more defined. Now if I go too much, as you can tell, it just kind of overwrites the fill entirely until you don't even know what that fill is. So we're going to put that at about, let's say, 10 points of stroke. And you can still make out the words. Now, I might even take it down just a little bit more. Right. It also depends on what font style you're using will affect this. So in this case, because we're using Goaty Stout, it's going to affect this. If I go back to my text tool and change this from Goaty Stout to, let's say, something more like Charlemagne standard bold, you can see that that is affected as well. Right? So what you choose to use in there is going to have an option. So let me take it back to Goaty Stout. Right? And you also have other options in here when you're working with the text. Right? So for example, you can see we had uniform distribution. I can also change it to the profiles in here of these different things. Another thing you can play around here with is opacity. Now the opacity is just what it sounds like. It's going to take this value here and it's going to change how that is rendered within the rest of the document. So if I come up here and I change the opacity, you can see I can make that a little bit more faded. So I'm going to kind of render this somewhere around, let's say, I can also type in here, let's do 85% opacity. So it kind of gives a little bit of a faded effect. And I'm also going to come in here and apply an envelope. I don't want the rise envelope, which I used previously. Instead, I'm going to make it do if we do a fish one, we can give it that option right there. Or we can even make it do, let's say, fish eye, which gives an effect like that. We have a whole bunch of different options, of course, of what we can do in here with this text. Now, what I'm going to do with this one, since we're dealing with the subject fish, is I'm going to leave it at fish. And I can also come in here and play around with these values here, which we hadn't really talked about before. All right, and so these will affect the text. So if you notice, the farther I go to the left, the more it affects this side of the image. The farther I go to the right, the more it affects this side of the image. So I'm going to put it right in here about 35%. I can also set the amount of horizontal and vertical distortion, which also can affect that. So I'm going to set the vertical distortion back to 0, and I'm going to set the horizontal distortion to 20. And I'm just going to click OK. And so now here's my text, here's my fish. And the last little bit of here is for this exercise, what I'm going to have you guys do is there's still quite a bit of blank canvas in here. And so what I would like to invite you guys to do is to go ahead and add something more to this blank canvas in here using some of the different techniques that we talked about, such as using the symbols library to go ahead and add something in there. So you can come in here, you have a whole bunch of different things that you could add in. Or you could use any of the color swatches that we talked about. You can use any of those different techniques. Even this fish here, if you wanted to change this fish, for example, and you wanted to apply a gradient to that fish, so that way he had maybe a little bit more of a different kind of effect going on with him. So there's a whole bunch of different things that you can do based upon what you think is going to be the kind of best choice of what you want it to be. So for example, right now I'm changing the gradient of this fish so that way I can have kind of different tones reflected throughout him as we travel along his body, because he's not all just one uniform orange, for example. And then I can, of course, adjust the slider here accordingly to kind of adjust those tones. So maybe I want the middle of his body to be a little bit more yellow, or maybe I want it to be a little more orange. All those options that you can do to really kind of help dynamicize your element here. But that concludes our notes for today, folks. Again, go ahead and add a little bit more, and I'll see you next time.